Hi everybody, Mr. Steger here. We're looking at our third activity of four. This will be glacial features and erosion. Now, what is a glacier? Glaciers are made up of fallen snow that over many years compress into large thickened ice masses. This takes many years. We're talking thousands. So what's happening is snowfalls accumulate. They don't melt. They keep adding up and adding up. Pretty soon that snow that's on the bottom changes into an ice. And think of this happening for thousands of years. So our average snowfall in Wisconsin, maybe 40, 50 inches, 60 inches. You're looking at 4 to 5 feet of snow. That's obviously not going to stay that thick because it compresses as the air spaces in between the snowflakes decreases. But that adds up and it creates a tremendous amount of weight, and it's because of that weight on top pushing down that glaciers move. Now, think of that. One of the glacial features I'm going to talk about is a came, and that's Lapham Peak. Lapham Peak's a pretty big hill, and the glacier that made that had to be taller than Lapham Peak. So, just something to think about. Now, glaciers move. They're not fast. It's really slow, but they do move like a river. They try to find the path of least resistance, and that's where they'll push through. One of the other things that you need to keep in mind, too, is that glaciers, as they move, they pick up debris. They plow into it, and they pick it up, and they carry it along with them. And by debris, I mean things like gravel and sand and rocks, literally from a grain of sand to a huge, massive boulder, possibly as large as a truck. Some of the glaciers are small, and by small I mean they fit between two mountains. Others can be really huge, hundreds of miles long, and that's what happened with Wisconsin. There's a glacier that covered almost half of the state at one point. Now, I've got a couple examples of glacial features. One of them is an esker, and this esker that I've chosen to show you right here is near Eagle, Wisconsin, south of Kettle Moraine. The eskers are formed as the glaciers are in the area. Streams essentially are created underneath the ice and on top of the land. And these streams, as they're moving across the landscape, are carrying boulders and gravel and sand, and as the water current slows down, those things settle out, and they create that feature that you see right here, kind of a serpentine, snake-like shape. Now, on the, that's my glasses. On the illustration that I've got, you can see in this case, this stream forming right here, coming out from underneath that glacier. That's where an esker would have formed, or could have formed. A couple of the other features here are drumlins and cames. A drumlin is really a teardrop shape, and the thicker part of the drumlin would be facing into where the glacier was, and a point faces away from where the glacier was. Now the came, back to the drumlin quick, if you drive from Milwaukee to Madison, you're actually going to be driving through several drumlins, and on the left and right side of the highway, if you look off into the distance and use your imagination a little bit, you can actually see these drumlin shapes in the landscape. Now the bottom one, the came at Lapham Peak, those are kind of interesting. Now this illustration up here doesn't show a came being formed, but I think I can explain it pretty easily for you. Imagine a large hole, I mean large, and in that hole water is rushing, very similar to like a bathtub drain or a sink drain when you unplug it and the water runs out. Well, this is happening here as well, and what that water is doing is it's carrying all that debris that the glacier's been picking up, and it's funneling and it's flushing all that debris down underneath it, and it's forming over time a hill, which we call a came. Now keep in mind, Lapham Peak is a pretty big hill or came. The glacier that formed that had to be bigger than the came, so that gives you a perspective on how massively thick these glaciers were. Now, it's Kettle Moraine. This is something I wanted to touch on because I think it's kind of interesting. we've got an illustration on the left here of Wisconsin, or a map of Wisconsin, and that red circle area, I'm trying to approximate where our school district is. You'll notice that it's kind of right on this seam, and that's where the Green Bay lobe of the glacier that last visited us and the Lake Michigan lobe met. So imagine these two massive sheets of ice moving over the landscape, and picture your hands on a beach. You push your hands together, just like these glaciers did, on top of a sand on the beach, and when you remove your hands, you can have a little ridge right there. Well, it's this ridge right here where the Green Bay and Lake Michigan lobes met, which forms the Kettle Moraine area that we know. Now, this photograph is of a glacial feature called a kettle, and that's formed when a large piece of the glacier falls off and gets plowed under the ground by the glacier, or it's massive enough where it settled into the ground itself and depressed the earth. Now, the term kettle comes from, people think, the settlers in the area years ago. They brought with them, when they moved into the area, these large cast iron pot kettles, and they would use them to make soap in. They would cook their food in them, hopefully not both at the same time. But the people that first spotted these kettles, to them it looked like somebody had taken the kettle, set it on the ground, and pushed it down and then lifted it up, because the sides of these kettles are usually fairly steep and kind of rounded on the bottom. So these settlers thought that that's what the glacial features we know as kettles look like. Now, for our activity, we've got a couple parts to this. It's not complicated. In fact, it's really kind of simple. For the first part, you're going to take a clean piece of glacier, and you're going to put it in some sand. Cover it with about 1 centimeter or half an inch of sand. So you're going to push the block of ice that I give you, and it's just going to be some water frozen in a small cup. But I want you to cover that with sand. Smooth it all over so you can't tell there's anything underneath it. Mark the area. Leave enough space next to it so you can get another piece of ice, because we're going to be talking about that in a second. And record what your observations are. So essentially describe what you see. And if you'd like to take your camera out and take a photograph of it, although you might want to wait until the second part is done before doing that. Now, the second part, so next to your kettle simulation that you just did, you're going to get a dirty glacier, and a dirty glacier is essentially the same cup with water, except in this one I'll have frozen sand and maybe some gravel. And I want you to set this on top of the sand next to where you've got your kettle simulation starting. And again, if you'd like to take a photograph of it, record your observations, and when you come back the next day, we'll take a look and see what we've got. Now, on a personal note, and a side story, I want to throw this in there. These glacial deposits have always been used for construction materials and projects and things like that. My uncle, who has a farm on the western end of Waukesha County, had a drumlin on his farm property, and when they built the interstate, they contacted his family and said, hey, we'd like to use this gravel material in this drumlin. And what they ended up doing is the material they took from that drumlin is actually the base of the highway of Interstate 94 from about Highway 67 in Summit or Oconomowoc to about Highway F in Ixonia. So when you drive down that interstate, a lot of the material that you're driving on came from a drumlin that was in my uncle's farm property. So a little side note there. Thanks for listening.